It was supposed to be a peaceful winter hike, but the eerie figure watching us from the ridge turned it into a nightmare. 3 true Skinwalker winter hiking horror stories. The last story is shocking. The trail stretched before us like a pathway into another world. Fresh snow coated the ground, muffling our footsteps as we trudged forward. The silence of the forest was almost unnerving, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. My partner and I were avid hikers, and this winter trek into the mountains was something we'd been looking forward to for months. The climb was steep but manageable. As the sun peeked through the branches, we laughed and talked about how untouched and serene everything felt. It was the kind of beauty that made you feel small, like you were trespassing in a place meant for something older, something wilder. That's when we first saw them, the footprints. They came from the woods and cut across the trail ahead of us. They were massive, each one at least twice the size of a human foot, and claw marks raked through the snow behind them. My partner knelt to get a better look. Bear, they guessed, but their tone didn't carry much confidence. The tracks disappeared back into the woods, and though we were unnerved, we convinced ourselves it was fine. Bears hibernate after all. Or so we thought. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, the forest seemed to change. The light dimmed and the long shadows of the trees stretched across the trail like dark, skeletal fingers. The air was still, heavy, as though something was waiting. We climbed a little higher, and the trail opened up to a clearing. That's when I noticed it, a figure on the ridge above us silhouetted against the fading sky. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But then it moved. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its limbs were thin and spindly, like it had been stretched too far. It didn't move naturally. Its head twitched to one side, then the other, as though it were watching us. "Do you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. My partner nodded, their face pale. We stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, the figure dropped to all fours and vanished into the trees. Panic set in. We started walking faster, glancing over our shoulders every few seconds. The forest was silent, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. When we reached a bend in the trail, I looked back and saw it again, closer this time, half hidden behind a tree. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the last light of the setting sun. "We need to go," my partner said, their voice shaking. The trail twisted and turned, but no matter how far we went, the figure stayed with us. Sometimes it was on the ridge above, other times it darted through the trees beside us. Its movements were wrong, like a puppet being dragged on strings. Then came the sound. At first, it was a low growl, almost like a bear's, but it quickly shifted into something else. Clicks, chirps, and what sounded like faint, mocking laughter. When we finally saw the parking lot through the trees, we broke into a run. The snow was deep, and more than once we slipped, but fear kept us moving. I glanced back one last time and saw it standing at the edge of the forest, its hollow eyes watching us. We dove into the car and locked the doors. As I started the engine, I saw it again, standing in the middle of the trail, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. We drove away as fast as we could, the forest disappearing in the rearview mirror. Neither of us spoke until we were back in town, safe under the glow of streetlights. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about those hollow eyes and the way they followed us. I still hike, but never in winter. There's something out there, something that doesn't belong, and it's watching. If you enjoyed so far, remember to like and subscribe for more. The snowstorm should have been the worst part of the hike, until we heard someone calling our names deep in the woods. We should have known better. The weather forecast had warned of snowstorms, but the appeal of a crisp winter hike was too tempting to resist. The trail we'd chosen was a lesser-known path, weaving through dense forest and eventually opening up to a beautiful mountain overlook. My friend and I packed light, but enough to get through the day. The first few hours were perfect. The fresh snow muffled the world, making the forest feel like it was ours alone. But as the afternoon dragged on, the wind picked up, and the soft snowfall turned into a biting flurry. The storm had arrived early. Visibility dropped quickly, and soon the trail markers were impossible to see. The wind howled, stinging our faces and numbing our fingers even through gloves. My friend suggested we take shelter, but the trees provided little relief. As we crouched under a cluster of pines, the sound came. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind. "Help!" We froze, straining to hear. The voice was distant, but it was unmistakably human. "Over here! Please!" My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances. No one else had been on the trail that day, or so we thought. "We have to check," my friend said. Reluctantly, I agreed. We shouted into the storm, calling out, "Where are you?" The voice didn't respond immediately. When it came again, it was closer. "I'm right here." The words didn't make sense. There was no figure in the whiteout, just trees and swirling snow. My friend took a few cautious steps forward, peering into the forest. "Over here," the voice said again, louder now. It was a calm, coaxing tone, as if whoever was calling us wasn't in trouble at all. Something about it sent a chill down my spine. It didn't sound like desperation anymore. It sounded like a trick. "Let's go back," I said, grabbing my friend's arm. They hesitated, torn between logic and the instinct to help. But before they could respond, the voice called again, this time mimicking my voice perfectly. "Come on, over here." My friend's face drained of color. We didn't wait for further confirmation. Turning back, we hurried through the storm, retracing our steps as best as we could. But the voice followed us. Now it was switching tones, sometimes begging, sometimes laughing. "Don't leave me behind," it said over and over, echoing through the storm. The snow grew deeper, and exhaustion set in. We stumbled through the forest, desperate for a way out. Just when it felt like we couldn't go any further, I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. "It's the trailhead," I shouted. We pushed ourselves forward, our legs burning. As we got closer, the light grew brighter, cutting through the storm like a beacon. But the voice wasn't done yet. "Wait," it called, soft and sweet now. "Don't go. You can stay here with me." We ignored it, focusing on the light. When we finally broke through the tree line, we found the parking lot and our car buried in snow. Relief washed over us, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As we fumbled with the keys and clambered into the car, I glanced back at the trailhead. Just beyond the trees, a dark figure stood, barely visible through the storm. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The voice came again, faint but clear. "Come back." We didn't stick around. The car's engine roared to life, and we sped down the mountain road, leaving the storm and the voice behind. But even now, I can still hear it in my dreams, calling my name with that same eerie, coaxing tone. We thought we were alone in the mountains, but the enormous tracks that circled our tent told a different story. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip, just my partner and I seeking some solitude in the remote wilderness. The weather had been colder than expected, but we came prepared, thick sleeping bags, a sturdy tent, and enough firewood to keep us warm through the nights. The first day was uneventful, filled with the kind of peaceful quiet you only find in nature. We set up camp at the edge of a small clearing, the snow-dusted pines towering above us like silent sentinels. By the time night fell, the temperatures had plummeted. We lit a fire and sat close, cooking dinner and enjoying the stillness. The world around us felt empty, almost sacred. But as the fire crackled and the stars emerged, I began to feel uneasy. It was the silence. True, it had been quiet all day, but this was different. There were no distant howls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The forest felt dead. I tried to shake it off. "Just the snow," I told myself. "It muffles everything." We crawled into the tent and zipped ourselves into the sleeping bags, the fire still glowing faintly outside. The cold made it difficult to sleep, but eventually, I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The air was frigid, and I could see my breath misting in the faint moonlight that filtered through the tent. I listened, straining to hear anything beyond the sound of my partner's slow breathing. Then I heard it. A faint crunching sound, like footsteps in the snow. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound was slow and deliberate, circling the tent. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, nudging my partner awake. They listened for a moment, their expression turning grim. "It's probably an animal," they whispered back. But the sound didn't feel like an animal. It felt deliberate, heavy, like someone or something was pacing just outside. We stayed silent, barely breathing, as the footsteps continued. After a while, they stopped, and the silence returned. Neither of us slept much after that. When dawn finally arrived, we unzipped the tent and stepped into the crisp morning air. The fire had long since burned out, and the clearing was bathed in pale sunlight. Then we saw them. Tracks. Massive tracks. Unlike anything I'd ever seen. They circled our tent in wide, deliberate loops, and each print was at least twice the size of a human foot. The claw marks were the worst. Deep gouges in the snow that seemed too large for any animal native to the area. "Bear?" my partner said again, though they didn't sound convinced. "Bears don't walk like that," I muttered, pointing to the way the tracks overlapped perfectly, as though the creature had been carefully pacing around us. A chill ran down my spine. The tracks led away from the clearing, disappearing into the dense woods. We decided to pack up early. Something about the place felt wrong now, as though the forest itself had been watching us. As we hurried to take down the tent, I felt the weight of unseen eyes. The hike back to the car was tense. Every snap of a branch, every gust of wind set my nerves on edge. Several times I thought I saw movement in the trees, dark shapes darting between the trunks, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. When we finally reached the trailhead and saw the car, relief washed over me. But just as we threw our packs into the trunk, I saw them again. Tracks in the snow, leading from the forest's edge to the car. This time they weren't circling. They were waiting. We didn't stick around to find out what had left them. As we sped away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw something tall and thin standing at the edge of the forest, watching us go. I still think about those tracks sometimes, especially on cold winter nights. Something was out there, something that didn't belong, and it knew we were there too. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, remember to like and subscribe for more.